Check.
Yeah, no, you're here. Now you're hearing me, I hope. So yeah, very welcome here to our session. So as Manuel already said, we are quite frequent speaker here on different topics. So today we will give you a short introduction to the DLT Pilot Regime, which just recently came into place. We as firm YPOG, we are just a law firm, but we have already advised a lot of these players quite focused on financial services and DLT. So we advised on the first crypto custody license ever granted in Germany, on the crypto register license, and now we just filed for our clients license under the DLT Pilot Regime, which is very exciting because, as I said, it just came into place last week. And now we already filed the license, so this is really exciting for us. And I think we will give you some insights. What are the topics that are still to be clarified finally with our German regulator BaFin? And so we will take you through this presentation and give you some of our insights and experiences we have just recently made.
Directly from the cockpit, so to say. As Carola mentioned, since last week, the sandbox is open for DLT-based market infrastructures, so trading venues and settlement infrastructures. So we invite everyone in ESMA and the regulators to play in your sandbox, but bring your own infrastructure. So who can participate in this regime, in this pilot regime, which is now set up for 6 years and maybe ongoing? We have investment firms that maybe are already trading venues, multilateral trading venues, or stock exchanges. They can apply for becoming a DLT-based MTF, a DLT MTF, and you could trade DLT-based financial instruments. Apart from that, we have another market infrastructure category, which would be a settlement infrastructure, who can operate such DLT SS. This would be a CSD. So we know, I think, one big player in the market. What is new and what you can do under this regime is to combine trading and the settlement within one infrastructure, which would be a DLT TSS. And this is what we know from regular crypto exchanges, but we don't see this in regular stock exchanges. You always have the trading venue separated from the CSD who's operating the settlement infrastructure. So this is quite new, and what you can do now, you can apply also for exemptions. You can settle trades with e-money tokens, what you cannot do today in regular exchanges. And you can bring retail participants and other companies which are not licensed investment firms to participate on your venue, on your DLT TSS or MTF or SS. So this is quite exciting and new. As you see, we have some limitations here. We have only a limited amount of shares, bonds, corporate bonds I could bring to this infrastructure. So there are limitations. This is what was often criticized, but still, let's try. So apart from that, we want to show you really what you can do with this infrastructure now. So over to you.
Yeah, we just put on the slide here the different roles and how would it work, how does it look like. For one example, we used DLT TSS. This is a trading and settlement system. So this is what's really new. The other one was the settlement system, just a DLT settlement system, which is an equivalent to the former CSDs. We knew on the DLT MTF, which are just a trading facility. So here you see a setup for a mixed scenario. How does it work? So people coming from the traditional financial background will recognize a lot of these parts because not everything is new. Sometimes it works a bit differently, but and people coming from the more cryptocurrency native token side, they will recognize some of the parts because they are very similar, as Anika already introduced, from what we know from these crypto exchanges and how they work. So we have these different players. Participants are the ones that can onboard, which is, as we just heard, natural and legal persons without any limitations. They just need a small top-up, which is meant by they need to have some DLT knowledge. We don't have a standard yet, so we're just developing a standard. What does it mean to have DLT knowledge? So is it just a questionnaire? How will we monitor this, and what we have not the final standard, so we just developed the first ones and decided what could be the questions. So these are the participants. And we have the issuer of DLT financial instruments. So the issuer, of course, just has to fulfill the normal regulations, so prospectuses, whatever it is, so the requirements are not different. He onboards with a DLT TSS, so with the settlement part, because you need to record your instruments in the system. This is something we know from the traditional financial services world as well. Then they will, after recording the DLT financial instruments in the system, which is also, as I said, done in the traditional world. Here we have an in-between step, which is the tokenization part. So you need to tokenize them to then, of course, trade them on the MTF, so the multilateral trading system. After the tokenization, of course, also as in the traditional banking world, you need to list your financial instruments on the marketplace. So these are the typical requirements, you know, from the traditional world as well. You have an admission. After the admission, of course, you have your central limited order book. Here it is a bit different because it can be based on a smart contract. So you have different scenarios here. Some of the players use smart contracts, and this is now very similar to what we know from DEXs. So you have different smart contracts. So for each trade, you have a smart contract, you have your pairs there, you have your financial instrument, a DLT financial instrument on one side, and then the euro, or whatever the currency is, on the other side. So your trading pairs, and each trading pair can be put in a known smart contract. And then you have your trading pairs on the central limited order book. Then you have the typical ordering, which is similar, as you know, from the crypto exchanges, you know, from the traditional banking business. Then you have here the same process with order confirmation, etc. So it's the thing that is different now for the traditional world, not for the crypto ecosystem, is then the settlement side, because after the trade was confirmed, you go into the settlement, and now in the traditional world, you don't know atomic settlement, as we call it, so instant settlement, you just know this T+2, so a settlement within 2 days, and this now is different here with the pilot regime. You can, because of using the technology, you don't have to, but you can have an instant, in this space called atomic settlement. So the trade and the settlement is in one act, in 1 second. This only works, of course, if the payment side is in place. So the player that use this atomic settlement often use e-money, tokens, of course, then, because the possibility is there that you can do it smart contract based. So it's a totally automated process, including this swap, this delivery versus payment, as we call it in the traditional world. And this can be done atomic, meaning the trade and the settlement is in 1 second. So this is one scenario. We could show you different scenarios. So we have another, you can look into it afterwards, because we would like to take you through some questions which came up in the process. Here we have not a TSS, but just an MTF. You see, you can have different players, so it doesn't have to be everything in one entity, but you can have different roles and different players, so you can have your trading and settlement leg differently, you can have external banks, so everything is possible here, and every scenario is possible. It depends on the setup of the player, what you do. Anika will take you through the last slide and tell you what are the upcoming questions that are not still totally clarified.
Yeah, so exactly. This being said, there are still some open points to discuss. I mean, this is a regime which is partly wide open, so you can use your different infrastructures. This is not what the regime provides you. You just can play and use the infrastructures and play as you want to use. But so how do we get now? In Germany, we have this crypto securities register because we now have crypto securities, which are electronic securities. They are DLT based, and you can issue bearer bonds. In order to do this, you need someone who is a registrar for crypto securities, a crypto securities registrar. So now we have someone that is a licensed entity under the Banking Act. So this requires a license to have to be such a registrar. And now we have the European regime where you are allowed to operate a settlement system, which is also the settlement system where you need to book first your securities in order then to trade them and then to settle them. So now we have two license regimes that are kind of conflicting. So, and we also have some registrars in Germany that have applied for licenses. So for them it would be good to have either an opportunity to participate, or if I'm already operating or I want to operate a TSS or an SS infrastructure, I would want to be the one in charge to operate as registrar, because I'm also responsible to say, okay, the issuance 100, I don't know, of share X and Y, I'm the one responsible that it was booked at first, that it's always there, and that you cannot change the issuance by booking some others then later on. So what we now have discussed with the regulators, how can we participate in here, or how can we kind of, solve this issue? So you have, when you take a deeper look in the CSDR, which is the regime for the settlement infrastructures, there you can apply for auxiliary services. Naturally, it would be banking services if you want to also have the cash leg of your transaction settled. But potentially, it will be also for the crypto securities registrar the opportunity to apply for this as an auxiliary service, although it's in the Banking Act and not the CSDR, but then to operate this register combined with your SS. So you will not need two conflicting registrars in the end, because this is what we wanted to solve with this regime, not to be able to, or to have to make a book entry with Clearstream or other CSDs, and then to have your separate infrastructure, which is then blockchain-based. So this was always a conflict. And now you want to have a system where you can combine this. And potentially it will be possible so that you can be a crypto securities registrar and operate a TSS within one entity. So when we go to these auxiliary services, as Carola mentioned, we can settle transaction with e-money tokens. So if I'm now a TSS and I will route e-money tokens for my clients because they will pre-fund potentially in order to make a trade, will I need to apply also for a banking license now? Because normally if I have funds of my clients, I would need to be a kind of bank or a payment service provider. But if you take a deeper look into the regime, e-money tokens are kind of exempt from that. So I wouldn't be, or I wouldn't need to apply on top for a banking license if I operate already a settlement system or a TSS. So this is quite, it opens some opportunities. Over to you for the instruments.
Yeah, the interesting part is, does it only, or can I only trade DLT financial instruments that were already issued on a DLT basis, or is it also possible to use normal certificate-based securities and then tokenize them later? This was a point that is in Germany in particular very important, because as Anika said, we have these electronic securities, but currently they are only limited to bonds. So we cannot have normal securities on chain yet. That is not possible. So it's really limited to bonds in certain funds actually, so UCITS funds that I can tokenize. So the question is, could we use really normal securities from which companies, Siemens, Daimler, whatever, in order to trade them then on chain? And we discussed this with BaFin as well, and the European regulator. The problem is, it's very, I know it's very lawyer thing probably to say it, but for us the exciting thing was that it turned out it can be possible, because the definition of DLT financial instruments says DLT financial instruments which are issued on DLT, and the issuance wouldn't take place on DLT because the issuance took place outside the system, so outside the DLT system. And so the question came up, what's happening then? And so we went together with BaFin to ESMA and talked with ESMA also about it, and ESMA as well as BaFin was very open to say, well, indeed, it doesn't make sense. So we probably have to read this definition a bit broader, that it's also possible to cover normal securities when they are tokenized later. This is the, you can look at one of our slides and you will see that's also possible to tokenize at a later step and therefore trade these securities which were issued in the normal traditional way with a global deed. You can nevertheless tokenize them later and then record them on the system and also trade normal financial instruments on chain then later on. And for the crypto community, maybe it's interesting to see what happens with these security token offerings. So you know these are not securities because they are not, you don't have a deed, so these are debt instruments, so they're normally issued under another regime. They are called security sui generis, so-called securities only by BaFin, because as they are not materialized in a deed, they cannot be regarded as a financial instrument, and therefore the question was what happens with them. They fall within the definition of the DLT financial instrument, but not in the German securities definition. And also here, I see, also here we learned from BaFin that probably we can cover them. So maybe the last 2 points quickly from Anika.
Or just maybe Article 26, this is quite interesting as well. So what the regulator tries to do with this regime is you need to actually report transaction for market surveillance purposes. And now you could give the regulator access to your trading system and they could have real-time information on what's happening on the trading venues in order to see if there's market abuse or so what to say. So maybe the other one, if you have questions later for the break on the capital requirements. So then, thank you very much.